Hey there, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this week's Weather Extra. I'm meteorologist Jillian Grace. We have a lot to uncover tonight, from NOAA's forecast for this upcoming hurricane season to the future of the nation's EV industry. But we start Weather Extra with a look at some of the top weather stories from right here in the Lone Star State to across the globe. United States' second largest territory, Guam, got slammed by Typhoon Mawar this past Wednesday. Wind gusts reached above 100 miles per hour. At one point, the typhoon had winds up to 155 miles per hour, but thankfully weakened just before moving onto the island, sparing the people of Guam from a worst-case scenario. Extensive damage was left behind across the island. Roofs were ripped off homes and businesses, trees shredded to pieces, and nearly all of the Pacific Island was left without power and utilities. The central and northern parts of the island received 2 feet of rain as the typhoon moved onshore. Thankfully, the governor reported no fatalities and only minor injuries. Strong thunderstorms ripped through southeast Texas earlier in the work week. 2 people were killed and several others were injured after a construction site collapsed as severe storms rolled through the Conroe area this past Tuesday afternoon. The National Weather Service conducted a storm damage survey after the storms passed and found damage consistent with straight-line winds in the range of 60 to 80 miles per hour. Large hail and heavy rain also occurred within the storms. And temperatures across California have been heating up after the historic winter season. As those temperatures climb, snow is beginning to melt and water levels are rising. Roads are covered with water, rivers have been flowing out of their banks, and campgrounds across the Golden State have been closed due to flooding. Yosemite National Park received twice the normal amount of snow this year, but park rangers say the excess of water is feeding waterfalls around the park, providing a beautiful and rare treat for visitors like you see on your screen right now. But it's been a much different scene across parts of Alberta, Canada, where wildfires have been ravaging across the western parts of the country. So far this year, Alberta Fire has responded to nearly 500 wildfires, burning through 842,000 hectaacres, which have displaced 10,000 residents. To put this into perspective, last year alone, under 500 hectaacres burned. And smoke from those fires in Canada traveled across the United States, which brought hazy skies to parts of the U.S. this past week. Air quality was lowered too, which limited time outdoors for some. Satellite imagery was also able to pick up a large plume of smoke as it traveled across the northern portions of the United States. Also, according to a new study published in the journal Nature Sustainability, rising global temperatures could expose billions of people to dangerously hot conditions in the coming years. Scientists say the climate niche, where humans flourish, is between 55 and 81 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside that window, conditions tend to be too cold, too hot, or too dry. If the world continues on its projected trajectory, about 2 billion people will be living outside the niche by 2030. According to the study, they'll be facing average temperatures of 84 degrees or higher, and by 2090, that population grows to nearly 4 billion people. Already, 600 million people are living outside the niche. Saturday, May 27th marks the 26th anniversary of the devastating EF5 tornado that killed 27 people in the town of Jarrell. The video you see right now is exclusive video shot by KWTX that day. This tornado was one of several that touched down across central Texas. The tornado in Jarrell was 3/4 of a mile wide and likely had winds over 260 miles per hour. The tornado was so strong that it ripped asphalt off the ground, off the roads as well, and some plumbing from the slabs of buildings. The state of Texas hasn't seen an F5 tornado since May 27th, 1997. Many Central Texas schools had their last day of classes this past week, so many minds are already in summer mode, but the official countdown to summer is still on. We're now less than a month away from the summer solstice. Summer officially kicks off on Wednesday, June 21st, and that's only 24 days away. Let's talk about and check out how our sunset times will be changing over the next month. The sunset on May 28th is 8:26. Throughout the month of June, we'll continue to add about 10 minutes of daylight to our days, and on June 21st, our sunset will be at 8:36, giving us a total of 14 hours and 12 minutes of daylight. June 21st also marks the longest day of the year. Our days will begin to grow shorter after the summer solstice, and by August 10th, Our sunset time is 8:16. Whenever Central Texans think about summer, we often think about the heat. But so far this year, we've been very lucky in that department. This time last year, we already had 22 90-degree days as of May 28th, with the first 90-degree day falling extremely early on March 26th. Now, overall, last year, we would go on to have about 81 total 90-degree days. But so far this year, we've only had 2, with the first occurrence back on May 5th and the second on May 19th. Just like we've been blessed with cooler than normal weather, we've also received some much needed beneficial rainfall these last few months. All of that rain has helped significantly with the current drought across Central Texas. But let's take you back to November 1st of last year. Much of Central Texas was under either severe or extreme drought. The orange and red shades that you see right here behind me. But between Killeen and Gatesville, there was an area of exceptional drought, that dark red shade, which is the worst drought condition an area can have. Let's fast forward to March 31st of this year. While we saw improvements in the exceptional drought, the entire western half of Central Texas was still under severe to extreme drought. We started to see some much needed rainfall throughout April, especially east of Interstate 35. No drought conditions existed back on May 4th, again east of Interstate 35. Beneficial rain continued to fall throughout the first half of May, and we saw continued improvement in our drought conditions across the area, with only an area of an extreme drought here closer to the Hamilton area, and that was back on May 18th. But here's a look at our latest drought monitor that just came out on the 25th this past Thursday. Areas near and east of I-35 now have no signs of drought. That does include Waco, Temple, and really the western portions of Bell and McLennan County have that abnormally dry conditions. But again, there's still going to be some severe drought ongoing across Mills, Hamilton, Coryell, and northern Lampasas County. But the good news is that we saw additional rain this past week, especially west of I-35. So we should hopefully see even more improvements in next week's drought monitor update. So again, that's some great news there. Now, with all of the rain that we've seen, we now bring in Chief Meteorologist who has a more update of recent here of how the rain has been helping out and improving our area lake levels. Brady.
Yeah, Jillian, all of our area lakes are still well below normal, but we're seeing significant increases in those lake levels, which is desperately needed. Lake Waco hit its lowest point on February 1st. Since then, the lake has come up over 4.5 feet. Lake Whitney hit its lowest point back in October of last year, October 22nd. Since then, it's come up over 3 feet. Now, Lake Belton and Stillhouse Hollow didn't hit their lowest points until April, so we haven't seen quite as big of a jump in those levels, but Lake Belton is up over 1.8 feet and Stillhouse Hollow is up 1/3 of a foot, so about 9 inches is how much Stillhouse Hollow has come up. Now, when you start talking those levels of how much the lake comes up, it's crazy to think how much water that is involved. So Lake Waco has increased the amount of water in the lake by 9.6 billion gallons. That's not anywhere close to Lake Whitney. This is where the craziest amount is. 19.8 billion gallons of water added to Lake Whitney. Lake Belton's up 5.7 billion. Stillhouse Hollow, again, that's the lowest climb we've seen, but still the crazy thing, coming up 9 inches has increased the amount of water by 1 billion gallons. Now, it's hard to put these kind of numbers into context, so you add all of these lakes together, all 4 of them, it comes up to 36 billion gallons. Now, to try to visualize this, I wanted you to think how many Olympic-sized swimming pools that would fill up. And crazy to think that's enough water to fill 54,000 Olympic swimming pools with water. So yes, we're getting an improvement, but actually still have a long ways to go.
Hurricane season officially begins this Thursday, June 1st. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, released its 2023 Atlantic Hurricane Season Outlook this past Thursday. And to tell us more about what NOAA expects this upcoming season, we turn to meteorologist Sean Bellafury.
The Atlantic hurricane season is just about upon us, and this year is set to be potentially another active storm season. Just a couple of days ago, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration released their hurricane season outlook, and that is what we're going to be talking about here. But before we get into the outlook, these are the names that you may or may not see this year. Arlene is the first storm, the A storm, and Whitney is the last storm. But remember back to 2020, how we had 30 named storms in a season? season, we had to use the Greek alphabet. Yeah, well, the Greek alphabet has been nixed, and we have a supplemental hurricane name list, which, should we get all the way through, we would start over again with Adria. Now, unlike the main name list, the supplemental list does not change year after year, but if a storm is retired, it just gets replaced. All right, so here is the hurricane season forecast directly from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Now, on average, for the last 30 years, we see 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes. Last year, we were right at average for the named storms. We were above average for hurricanes and below average for major hurricanes. Now, this year, the forecast calls for, well, average conditions. 12 to 17 named storms, kind of right around that average, 5 to 9 of which would become hurricanes, and then 1 to 4 major hurricanes. The major factor in the hurricane forecast this year is El Nino. That is expected to bring us an average year in the tropics. And what El Nino is basically the opposite of a La Nina. During La Nina years, you see a cooling of the equatorial waters just off the coast of South America. But in El Nino, those sea surface temperatures are warmer than average, which leads to thunderstorm development, which leads to high wind shear across the Atlantic basin. That extra wind shear should give us a less active year, but the wind shear could be offset by warm sea surface temperatures. So we're kind of having a battle between which is going to take over, the El Nino or, of course, those warm sea surface temperatures. The odds that we see an El Nino for the first half of the hurricane season, June to August, 89%, pretty high, almost a guarantee, and even more of a guarantee, September to November, a 94% chance of El Nino conditions in the Pacific Ocean, which again has the impact on the Atlantic hurricane season. But the sea surface temperatures are certainly going to be the problem. This is the sea surface temperature map across the Gulf of Mexico and parts of the Caribbean Sea, and shaded is sea surface temperatures 80 degrees or above, which is what we need for tropical storm and hurricane development. Of course, close to home is where we don't want those storms to form. But for the first month of hurricane season in June, the most likely locations for tropical storms and hurricanes to form is in the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean Sea, and off the east coast of the United States. And the average prevailing track takes the storms usually either into the eastern Gulf of Mexico or right into Texas. Reporting in the studio, Sean Bellafury, KWTX News 10.
Welcome back to Weather Extra. In our documentary, Monster from the Sky, that aired earlier this month, we showed you how downtown Waco was changed forever by the 1953 tornado. In this week's Degrees of Science, Chief Meteorologist Brady Taylor talks with the Texas Collection to show us more on how one area changed in particular.
The R.T. Dennis building, I guess, probably is the most famous of all, and where the most of the death occurred.
Yes.
Why? Well, first, just the history.
Yes, it was built in the 1890s. R.T. Dennis Company moved into it in about 1892, and originally it was about 3 floors. And then in the 1920s, they added 2 more stories to it. So the original elevation, 3 stories, was about as even as the building next to it, which was Wood Brothers Dry Goods Store. And so brick, wood frame, non-steel structure on the inside, unlike the Alico building, which was. So they were not steel structured. They could not withstand stress. So when the tornado hit, the Alico building swayed about 10 inches. It had a steel structure. It could withstand that sort of wind. And a building like this, just brick, wooden supports, wooden floors, no inner steel, like I just mentioned. When those sorts of tornadic winds hit, it could not take it. Could not take the stress. There was no flexibility like the Alico building. So it came down. It slid down like we have here. And I've heard accounts where it just slid down like a house of cards onto the intersection here where Dr. James and his wife were killed. Right here, they were stopped at a red light. They found them a couple of days later embraced in their car. The car was about 2 feet high. And just imagine 5 floors coming down on you. And there were several people that were killed, not only within the block itself and within the building. I think the number is around 30 and more people on the street down below, like I just mentioned.
So go down a little farther on 5th and Franklin now. Tell me about the history of the Pageant building, a beautiful building.
Yes, absolutely. So the Pageant building was built in the late 1800s, and it was originally Tom Paget Wholesale Saddlery. And the Tom Paget Company supplied harnesses for French and British troops during World War I. It was the #1 go-to place for saddlery. Wagons. Clint Paget was a revolutionary, and he actually sold automobiles in the 1910s when they came in vogue. In later years, Paget's sold the building, so the Dennis Company acquired the old Paget building after they left the corner here. So this was the warehouse. It was full of furniture, it was full of stoves, dressers, beds, household goods, plates, china, flatware, you name it. So stored here. And I would imagine it was quite top heavy. You probably had some of the heavier furniture up top, while you had the bottom area for cargo. So it was very top heavy, and they were not steel structures, as we had mentioned. So the winds came, they toppled over. So that's the situation here, and that's why we ended up like the devastation we did. These were built in a period where steel frame just wasn't part of the architectural design.
Talked about the RT Dennis and the Pageant. So
yes.
Austin was a very busy area, and I know this is probably one of your favorite pre-tornado kind of pictures to show how vibrant downtown was. But tell me some about all the other buildings that were there next to the RT Dennis.
So the Joy Theater here next to the RT Dennis building, and it was Woods Brothers Tailors, Harlech Tailors, Perfect Tailors, jeweler down here, Town Jewelers. So a lot of tailors, theater, the Chris Cafe. The Chris Cafe was just pulverized by debris falling from the RT Dennis building.
And this would have been a busy area at that time in the afternoon, wouldn't it?
Yes, so the clock stopped at about 4:40 on the Amicable building. Juanita Willis took a photograph of the clock, stopped at that time, 4:40. It was the busiest intersection in Waco, and it was the hub of the retail district. It could not have hit at a worse time. Monday, rush hour, 4:40, just before 5 o'clock. You know, had it been the day before, it would have been very different, but the busiest intersection in Waco, there's a lot of things to consider here. Literally, it was a storm, but it was also a perfect storm of very unfortunate circumstances. Also, Waco, as people knew it, changed, which I was saying a minute ago. The 114 people is what we need to look at the most. However, the buildings too were a great loss. And the old Paget building, you know, those were landmarks for the city. And they were just literally wiped off the map overnight. It changed. And so it hit Waco in many, many ways.
To hear more about how the 1953 Waco tornado forever changed downtown, scan the QR code on your screen to watch on YouTube. Welcome back to Weather Extra. Could this be a new California gold rush? We're talking about lithium, a crucial metal set to be extracted from underneath California's Salton Sea. Lithium is a key for electric car batteries, and as demand skyrockets for electric vehicles, there's hope a new lithium rush could save the dying Salton Sea and supercharge America's EV industry. Mike Valerio takes us to the desert for a closer look.
It looks like a shimmering sea that was once called a miracle in the desert.
The Salton Riviera, beside the blue Salton Sea, is the place for you to take charge of your future.
A Hollywood hideaway 3 hours from Los Angeles, where Sinatra and the Rat Pack played. But now, after decades of drought and farm runoff raising the water's salinity, the Salton Sea today is surrounded by dust and decay.
The hope is that the chronic unemployment and poverty down here can be alleviated by the development of Lithium Valley.
This gurgling and sputtering from underground gases potentially heralds a new beginning, a transformation from languishing vistas to Lithium Valley.
These structures are called mud volcanoes when they're above ground.
Geologist Michael McKibben explains deep underneath us, where two tectonic plates are pushing past each other, magma heats groundwater. And within that salty water, called brine, minerals dissolve, including the valuable metal lithium.
This is the gold right here.
Yes. Solid lithium is essential for electric vehicle batteries. Right now, most lithium battery production is in China, but experts say the Salton Sea region could provide enough lithium to move the U.S. toward lithium independence, supercharging our EV transition.
Our intention is to be in construction this year and be in operation in 2025.
Eric Spomer is CEO of Energy Source Minerals, one of 3 companies planning to draw lithium from the underground hot brine.
This is where the separation begins.
Yes, this is where the high temperature, high pressure fluids coming up into our high pressure separator.
Boiling brine already fuels 11 Salton Sea geothermal power plants, among them Hudson Ranch 1. The brine steam spins its turbines, and that creates clean energy. The plan now is to extract dissolved lithium from that same brine.
We developed a technology that is incredibly efficient at extracting lithium from brine and rejecting impurities.
One of the hopes with lithium extraction is that it could bring vitality back to the Salton Sea and so much of what we're looking at all around us. Fewer than 10 years ago, this was underwater, and people who live in and around the area hope that with more money into the economy, at least a fraction of the Salton Sea can be restored to its former glory.
Simply put, Ruben Hernandez, owner of the nearby Buckshot Deli and Diner, hopes a lithium boom leads to a boom in customers and a flood of tax revenue for a better future. My grandchildren will grow up here, he tells us. I hope they'll have good services and a good quality of life. That is, if lithium leads to a second miracle in the desert, one for our time and for the road ahead. On the banks of the Salton Sea, I'm Mike Valerio reporting.
That's all we have for you for this week's Weather Extra. Hope you all have a great rest of your Memorial Day weekend. See you next time.